Hi everybody. This week in my Psychic Minute, I'm going to talk about, I wrote down the concept of being where we're supposed to be and realizing that even if it feels like, I don't want to be here another minute, sometimes we have to show up and be of service. And you'll really know when you're in alignment because you'll have a feeling. And I want to describe an experience I had many years ago. My first book, or my second book, came out, and I was doing a book tour. And that was when book tours were popular. You'd go and sit in the bookstore. But I'd set up a 30-city tour. And it was for my fashion book, Fabulous You. And I have to tell you, I always wondered when I went into fashion, what am I doing in this business, And it all culminated for me on that trip as to what my real calling was and what I was really supposed to be doing. And it was really interesting because here I am on this 30-city tour, and I'm doing these fashion seminars and interviews, newspaper, radio, TV, and I'm just every day. And my last day, I was in Macon, Georgia, and my ticket was out of Atlanta. So I think I was finishing up at 3 and my flight was at 7. It was something like that. And I have to tell you, 30 days on the road, and at the time, they flew you first class, and I had flown first class, so I had a first class ticket, and I was so excited about going home, and the bookstore was dead that day. It was a book signing from 2 to 3, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like practically looking at my watch, waiting for the thing to end, because nobody was in the bookstore. They'd bought the book already, or they were going to get it later. So I'm sitting there, I'm going, and this couple walks in. And they're kind of like looking around at the book, and I'm thinking, oh, I hope they just go because I want to leave a few minutes early. And he's looking at me and looking at the book, and she's looking at me, and finally she says to him in a loud whisper, "Go talk to her, that's why we're here." Uh-oh. So he walks over, and he just kind of, then she walks over, and he's standing there, and she said, "Look, we just drove 3 hours to see you." It was like 3 or 4 hours. And she said, "My husband really wanted to meet you." And I said to him, I kind of looked at him quizzically because I was like, this is a fashion book, right? It's for women. And he said, "But you know what?" He said, he introduced himself, and he said he was a preacher. And he felt that the Lord had called him to come meet me. There was something I said in my book about how I always felt out of place in fashion. And my mother was a style maven, and I always felt like I wasn't dressed as well as Mom, So that's what pulled me to write that book. And what happened was, and it was fascinating, he just said, "Well, I don't know, the Lord told me to speak to you." And I have to be honest with you all. When someone says that to me, I go, "Okay, sit down." I don't care what's going on. If you really have a calling for something, if someone is really reaching out to you, it's your obligation as a spiritual being to sit down and hear what they have to say, because there was some sincerity in this man that I can't really describe in the moment, but I had he and his wife sit down. We sat there and we prayed and we held hands and we cried together for almost 3 hours. Now, it was about 5:30 when I left the bookstore. Now, for those of you that don't know Atlanta, the Atlanta airport, and I will tell you about the conversation because it was life-changing, because I understood from that one meeting what my work was about, because I didn't understand why I was on a 30-city tour for fashion. But in that moment, this couple talked to me, and he couldn't come out to his congregation. He was having a horrible drinking problem, and he couldn't stop his compulsiveness, and he couldn't stop, and he couldn't stop. And he said, "Something told me I could talk to you." And of course, I grew up with alcoholism, so it was like, of course you can talk to me. I grew up loving an alcoholic, and I know what that is. And we had this really grace-filled conversation, and through it, I was really moved to say to him, "You need to come out to your congregation, because if you're hiding, it means others are hiding, because we're a mirror of the people in our community." And he said, "Of course we are," And by the end of our conversation, we were all like teary, It was just very moving. And he said, "Thank you, thank you for the blessing." And I said, "Thank you." And I realized at 5:30, everybody's like, "There's no way you're going to make your plane in Atlanta. There's no way." And I said, "Well, I'm still going to go." Something told me, right? It's like knowing. So I said, "I'm still going to go to Atlanta." So I hugged them both goodbye. I will tell you what happened with them. And I get in my car, and of course, anybody's ever been in Atlanta rush hour traffic on a Friday, I got to the airport, I don't know how I did it, at like 7:15, 7:30. So it was the last plane to LA that day, Los Angeles that day, and it was leaving at 7. And I get in, of course, the terminal's empty, and I run up to the counter, and there's one person there. There was one person, I guess, finishing up. And I said, listen, this is crazy, but I was on the 7 o'clock to LA, and she looked at the thing, and she smiled at me, and she said, actually, that plane has a mechanical. It's still at the, I'll see if we can get you, down there. Of course, if you're like Atlanta, you have to take all these trams. Long story short, I get to the gate. They got me on the plane. There was one seat. It was mine. It was my first class seat that they had not given away. I get on, and literally when I walked on the plane, it was like 8:15. I get on the plane, and everybody looks up at me like, what? And I said, I'm sorry to delay everybody. We can leave now. And the captain comes over and says, okay, we're ready to take off, And I ended up making my plane. And because I was so, I was tired, I wanted to go home. And it was one of those things where I knew that I was of service. It was such a profound experience for me of walking away and going, that's my calling, is to be there at that level. Because really what all of this is about, it's about you connecting with spirit. It's not about me. It's like I get to be used as a messenger, or for your connection with your higher power, God, spirit, whatever you choose to call it. But at the end of the day, what I realized is that I was on that book tour for those people. See, sometimes we're in a place that we don't understand, but it's because there's a higher calling to it. And so I was in that place because of them. And I have to tell you, I got a postcard 6 months later from them, and they were doing great. And he had, in fact, come out to his congregation, and they were all, there were several people that had come forward saying, we have this problem too, and they started an AA meeting in their town. And the point of this conversation is that it's about knowing that when you get those signs, that sometimes, even though you want to go somewhere else because you got to be somewhere, really ask yourself, is this moment with this person more important than that? And in that moment, being with them was more important, because had I rushed to the plane, I would have sat there for that hour and a half and had lost on this experience. So just remember that we are where we're supposed to be, and that is today's theme, really. Think about the times in your life that have changed your life, and you were always supposed to be somewhere else in that moment. So I will see you next time. Thanks.